Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2, Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning is supposedly the franchise's last adventure. Here we find cinema's most beloved crazy man, Ethan Hunt, coordinating with his team to take out the all-powerful, ever-present AI entity before it destroys all life on Earth. Along the way, he'll encounter numerous elements and mistakes from his past as this movie seeks to tie together the entire series with this incredibly ambitious swan song. But admittedly, in its efforts to reach such ambitious heights, it does seem to falter a bit in trying to tell a cohesive story. Now, it's no secret that the Mission Impossible movies were more or less built off of the back of Tom Cruise, as he seems content to endanger his own well-being for the sake of cinema. Mr. Hollywood himself never half-asses his own efforts, and he's found a great collaborator in director Christopher McQuarrie, who has taken this series to new heights. I would say that the sixth installment, Fallout, is unequivocally the greatest action movie made in the last decade. And just speaking personally, I will say that I'm a huge fanboy of these films. I would say it's my favorite modern action franchise, even dwarfing John Wick. And it's crazy to say that given that this whole thing started before I was even born. The fact that it's been able to continue as long as it has, while only seeming to increase in quality, is just insane. And the fact that it's been helmed by the same star this whole time is even crazier. So I was incredibly excited going into Final Reckoning. But I was also quite nervous, because there was a wave of early reviews and reactions that described it as an absolute mess, which just broke my heart. But I still marathoned the franchise and went to see this thing in ultra screen. And with it clocking in at nearly 3 hours, I of course have quite a lot to say. Let's begin by reiterating what I'm sure everyone is going to say about this movie coming out of it, and that is that the action is spectacular. Most people know the Mission Impossible franchise for its death-defying stunts, seeing its lead star engaging in the most jaw-dropping of situations, and there were two sequences here that were the standouts, one involving a submarine and the other involving a biplane. There is such an energy to these scenes that you could tell that the entire theater was holding its breath during while watching in anticipation. These segments rank among the franchise's best, along the Burj Khalifa sequence and my personal favorite, the opera scene from Rogue Nation. All of this action is brought to life by the movie's exceptional cinematographer Fraser Taggart. The visuals are tremendous, and I'd love to see more of this guy's work in the future. The action on display is what truly defines summer blockbuster filmmaking, and I would recommend that people check out Final Reckoning off of this alone. Now, there is a certain formula to these films that I feel like Cruise and McQuarrie absolutely perfected with Fallout. With their final two projects, it's clear they wanted to experiment a bit. Dead Reckoning leaned into an almost Buster Keaton-esque tone with this level of humor that it used that offset the tension in an entertaining way. That mini car chase is another huge standout from that film. Here, the humor is almost removed entirely. This is by far the darkest and most grim Mission Impossible yet, and I think that perfectly sets the stakes for this being the end. We've reached a point in this continuity where Ethan Hunt has reached demigod levels of skill and power. I can imagine some may criticize just how good this guy is at everything he does, but honestly, I accepted that fact the moment he was able to memorize an entire list of bank accounts in Rogue Nation. And it's a treat to see this near borderline superhuman be forced to summon every ounce of strength to deal with this digital ghost of an enemy. I know there's some debate over whether or not this will end up being the final movie when all is said and done, but if I'm being honest, I truly don't know how they could even tell another story that's bigger than this one is. The title Mission Impossible has always been used to demonstrate the difficulty of the mission these characters face, but this is by far the most impossible Mission Impossible yet. And that tension was expertly done throughout. Ethan and his team are pushed to the absolute brink of their limits, and a good amount of that story actually has them separated. But while that decision to separate them helped to further demonstrate how dire the stakes were, I can't help but feel that it ended up leaving some of the main characters in the dust. And I would say that that was my biggest issue with the Final Reckoning. Now look, the Mission Impossible series was never known for having the most emotionally complex characters, but at this point, we've grown to love the main team. But on top of their involvement in the plot, you also have to factor in the newer players that were introduced in the last film, Dead Reckoning, and you have an entire new slate of people that are introduced in this film, and you have individuals who were brought back from the earlier films. Even with this massive 3-hour length, there just isn't enough time to juggle these characters effectively and focus on anyone in particular besides Ethan Hunt. And with this being the story's conclusion, I left feeling a little dissatisfied in the way that things were left off with some of the team members. I will say that Tramell Tillman was a standout. He's fantastic in Severance, and he's just as solid here, making his 5 minutes of screen time count. I did already mention the 3-hour runtime, which I can totally understand would seem daunting for people. And when looking back at the finished result, I do think that things could have been tightened up, particularly in that first act. There's quite a bit of setup and exposition that needs to be delivered in this early chunk of the story, and while melodramatic delivery of mission details is not uncommon in this franchise, the way it was done in the first hour of Final Reckoning felt so haphazard. I really dug the prior film, Dead Reckoning, but similar to this one, the weakest part of that movie was its first half hour, where it was throwing so much exposition at the audience. But at the time, I figured the filmmakers were just trying to give enough info to fill 2 entire movies, since this was originally envisioned as a 2-parter. I imagine you needed that 30-minute setup, so we could immediately launch into the action here with this movie. So it was kind of baffling when this movie starts, and it immediately throws even more new elements and characters at you. The film does this thing where it shows a lot of flashbacks from the films that have come beforehand, and I'm not gonna lie, the first time they did this towards the movie's opening, it did hit hard. I won't go into detail to avoid spoilers, but it sort of recaps the prior events that Ethan Hunt has experienced, and I thought it was well done. But this flashback technique is something that was done repeatedly to the point of getting on my nerves. And it's especially egregious when it would show multiple flashbacks from the prior movie several times. I understand wanting to emphasize certain plot points for an audience, but when you show the same exact scene from the prior movie 3 times, it gets a little annoying. It felt as if this was originally supposed to be a 2-hour and 20-minute movie, but 30 minutes of archival footage was added as a result of test screening audiences not remembering certain things being referenced. And these references to earlier installments don't just stop at flashbacks, as there are objects and characters brought in from the past. Some of these references help to improve the early movies and give a sense of finality for this one, but other references just felt weird and out of place. There was one revelation about a certain side character in particular that literally added nothing to the storyline and could have been cut entirely to save on screen time. Oh, and the villain stinks. No, not the Entity. The Entity's cool, but this guy, he stinks. I know there was a lot of people who complained about him in the last film, but I thought he was perfectly serviceable as the primary henchman of the Entity. But in this movie, he's kind of doing his own thing, and he ends up feeling more like a minor inconvenience rather than an actual threat for Ethan. And for some reason, he has the personality of an Austin Powers villain now. You already have this massive computer deity that's threatening to destroy all of mankind. The inclusion of this generic-ass mustache-twirling bad guy just felt unnecessary. But overall, I dug The Final Reckoning. It's big, convoluted, overdramatic, and messy, but it's also a perfect distillation of the high points that the series has displayed. The first hour is rough, and the villain is pretty weak. But the action and pure spectacle is worth the price of admission alone. You can tell Cruise and McQuarrie put their all into this production, and the passion is oozing off screen. It's only the script that holds it back from true greatness. I can completely understand a more casual filmgoer checking this out and saying, wow, that was an absolute disaster. But as a fan of this franchise, I just can't bring myself to say that. It's not among the series' best, and I would definitely rank it towards the bottom of the tier list if I had to do an official ranking, but you should absolutely check this out on the biggest screen you can. I'm gonna give Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning a B-.